Beyond Lumina, Episode 13, Savages. A tempest raged across a large, forest-covered island in the dead of night. Two figures sat in the treetops, cloaked in the vast darkness. Suddenly, they saw an astonishing light pierce through the forest canopy. The light grew larger and brighter, and the two figures moved and watched the phenomenon cautiously and anxiously. The light descended into the woods not far from the two figures, followed by an immense crashing sound. After a moment of silent agreement, the two figures began to move toward the disturbance. The two silhouettes traversed slowly but methodically through the rough storm, and eventually came upon a crash site, where a large metal ship lay half in ruin amongst a plethora of downed trees. There were openings in the vessel, intentional and unintentional, that allowed vision inside. The two figures waited in the darkness nearby and watched those within. Soon getting a grasp of the situation, the duo descended to the wet ground and approached the craft. Any sound their quiet footsteps made drowned by the din of the storm. Then one of them mounted the side of the vessel and deftly ascended to the top of the wreckage. Creeping along the top, the figure pulled from within folded garments a small spherical object which had been picked up and manipulated while the two were on their way to their current location. Just then, one of the inhabitants of the ship spoke, and the person atop the ship hurried to the crack in the hull and tossed the spherical object inside. After several moments and a little struggle, all sound within the crashed pod quieted, and the shadowed figure on top then went inside. Once it was safe, the one still outside gave a call like an animal that was loud enough to be heard over the downpour. On the ground was a thick piece of tree bark with some strong vines tied to it, quickly crafted once the duo reached the crash. The one within the ship then unlatched the door, and the two then dragged out two of the people dwelling within, the two they thought looked the most important, and placed them on top of the large slab of bark. Soon after, two big steed-like beasts trotted into sight, coming up to the two figures. The figures attached the vines to the beasts, then mounted them and took off into the dark forest. "Keep up, or you're getting left behind," the harsh voice of Drop pierced even through the heavy storm. Upon coming to after the crash, Drop's subordinate, Crag, noticed he was the only one conscious. He quickly awoke Drop and his co-officer Nail, and they quickly escaped with three of the other soldiers who were still unconscious, Crag dragging two of them out and Nail the other. At this point, all were awake and walking on their own. However, one of the soldiers had his leg injured in the crash and was struggling to maintain the normal pace of the others who were seeking an escape from the seemingly endless woods. Drop knew they were completely on their own at this point. The Ascendancy was certainly not going to send a rescue party for them. He knew how expendable they all were. Indeed, Drop was ready to rid himself of all the incompetent soldiers he was currently forced to lead, save for his two officers, who were the only people Drop trusted in the entire system. The 6 Ascendancy soldiers had been walking for quite some time, and eventually the storm began to subside, and they even began seeing a few of Lumina's rays peeking ever so slightly through the labyrinth of trees behind them. After the hours of pitch-black darkness, even this seemed to illuminate the entire forest. All Drop could hope was that they would eventually find a way out of the forest, and then they would be just fine. First Private Kvass walked with Sergeant Benta, his superior, up many flights of stairs of a tower to the top, where a control room was located. Now newly promoted, Benta was going to prepare him for another job, maintaining Ridikin's monitoring station. Once inside, among an array of machines, Benta began to tutor Kvass. Eventually he made his way to the main task of monitoring communications coming from off-world. This here, Benta said, pointing to one of the many displays, will cycle through all frequencies and pick up anything incoming, which will show up here. He pointed to another screen. Here's a good example, Benta continued, after selecting one of the pieces of data. This one has actually been showing up ever since the attack on the Alliance warship out in our local space. We have no idea what it is or where it's coming from. Nothing has changed about it, though, so it's becoming less of a worry and more just an oddity, if I do say so myself. But it seems too man-made to just be interference. Voss listened to the strange audio and agreed. It was definitely not just random noise. It's strange that nobody knows what it is, though, the new first private wondered out loud. Indeed, his commander concurred. It's certainly not one of our signals, or of any other Federation world. And the longer you listen to it, the more it becomes just one loop. I can't imagine what kind of message it's broadcasting out here where no one will understand. Anyway, that's basically what you'll be doing, but you'll be dealing with real communications. Like this one here. Another piece of data had just appeared on the monitor. It's a normal landing code. You'll just have to clear... Benta stopped. Wait a minute. That's not just any code. That's a high security signal. But that's not one of our ships. Aezic slowly came to and tried to focus his mind. He was soon aware that he was being dragged along the ground on some type of sled, bound hand and foot with something thick and strong. The storm was now just a light drizzle, and Lumina seemed to be nearing the horizon. Aezic could just barely make out his immediate surroundings, and also felt that there was someone else with him. It was Vala, who was still unconscious. Aezic tried to tell if she was further injured by their captors, but he himself felt fine, so figured her condition was still just a combination of her head injury and the poisonous gas they had inhaled aboard the escape pod. Aezic then tried to get a look at the ones who had taken them, but it was yet too dark to see, and it was hard to turn fully to view them. He thought he saw some large beast pulling them, but besides that he couldn't tell. They were moving at an easy pace, and it seemed they were on some type of path, because the ride was rather smooth. Aezic thought he would have a shot at escaping, if it weren't for his legs being tied, and if it weren't for Vala also being captured. Well, we aren't dead yet, Aezic thought reassuringly, so maybe there's a chance to save ourselves wherever we're being taken. I guess it's the only chance we have. Just then, they stopped, and Aezic thought he heard something moving through the woods nearby. A beast made a grunting noise. The one pulling them, Aezic discerned. He heard nothing else now but the dripping of the wet forest, and after a few moments, the beast, or beasts, he was beginning to think, began pulling them again. Soon, Vala began to stir, and slowly blinked awake. She too realized quickly that she was a prisoner, but was somewhat relieved when she turned and saw Aezic next to her. He motioned for her not to speak. Together they would be able to access their synth-plate plasma cutters, specifically made for such situations, but it would not be a silent process, and their captors were sure to hear them freeing themselves. Their best bet was to act as quickly as possible. But before they began, the beasts came to a stop once again. The sky above the dense canopy of trees was supposedly bright, but little light filtered in to where Aezic and Vala were. Nevertheless, Aezic could have sworn he saw something like structures up in the large trees. He kept telling himself that his eyes were playing tricks on him, until he found it harder and harder to believe this. Suddenly, Aezic and Vala were jolted upward, as the ropes once tying them to the two beasts were now hoisting them into the trees. The two Ascendancy soldiers had made a break for it through the dark, stormy forest after being given the chance to flee the escape pod of their hijacked ship. They were now drenched even through their synth plate, and huddled under an overhang that formed a slight cave. I don't know about all this, the one said. Maybe we should go back and see if they'll still let us stay. It's nasty out here. No way, replied the other. Our only chance is to find High Leader Drop and the others. We just have to hold out until the storm clears. But what if the storm doesn't clear? Asked the first. What if it's like this here all the time? That's impossible, the second answered. There's no way that... Wait, he paused. Did you hear that? The two Ascendancy soldiers tried to sharpen their sense of sound, then both heard what sounded like a carriage coming closer. The second soldier motioned to the first to get up and see what it was. Reluctantly, the first one climbed out of their cove and poked his head over the top toward where the sound was coming from. For a moment, he could make out the shape of what looked like people riding two large beasts, and he quickly ducked back down. As he did, they heard the passerby stop. The two soldiers crouched there holding their breath, not daring to make another noise. Soon enough, the beasts began moving once more. A while later, the first soldier spoke again. I think we should get back to the ship now. I'll take the pirates over this place. I agree, the second finally affirmed. But which way is the ship? Really out of your element here, Mr. Lawner, Zario said to himself as he scoured blindly through the dense, dark forest, looking for Aezic and Vala. He had very little experience with such wilderness expeditions, and had no idea what to look for. He spotted something that seemed like it could be a path, and he had followed it from their crash site. Now he had lost both the path and some hope. What are you even doing out here looking for these fools? Mecca was right. Maybe I put too much faith in this guy. I can't let her know she was right, though. I'll have to find them and get back to prove her wrong. I hope they're doing alright. His thoughts drifted to his own crew, his family, especially his actual sister, Mecca, who, for all he knew, had by now been captured by the Ascendancy or the Alliance. He had little time to worry, though, for once Lumina finally started faintly shining through the cracks of the forest, Zario saw one of the last things he expected. Hurrying, the mercenary leader quickly reached the end of the woods. He came out upon a sprawling beach, and on the opposing shore, an active port. A port full of Royal Ascendancy cruisers. Lumina's rays, Zario swore to himself. What is the Ascendancy doing operating on a pre-space world? I can't believe they're getting away with it without the other two powers finding out. How many other uncivilized worlds have they already infiltrated? That nagging feeling Zario kept getting, that something big was happening and that it was not good, was getting stronger. Zario stealthily made his way close enough to the main port to get a feel for their situation. He knew he couldn't risk actually going in, because there were sure to have been reports of his crew in both Ascendancy and Alliance space by now. The Ascendancy is too strict to just leave an easy escape route for us, Zario thought as he scoured the bay for a vessel they might steal. Just then, he spotted Drop and the other Ascendancy soldiers from the ship, and quickly ducked behind some trees. No time now, he thought. They're going to be sending a squadron to check out the crash for sure now. I gotta get back. Zario turned and hurried back down the way he had come through the forest. He didn't make it very far, however, before being struck on the head from behind and falling unconscious. Did you not hear what I told you, you insubordinate? High Leader Drop of the Ascendancy scolded a low-ranking officer. It was our Ascendancy escape vessel you saw, and it is full of important prisoners that I need you to bring back here immediately. My crew and I need some rest after our ordeal. The leader in charge of that docking bay sputtered out a hesitated response. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't have the authority to... Don't give me excuses, Drop shouted. I'm not trying to, sir, the leader replied hastily. It's just that I have to tell my superiors about it first. Well, hurry up and get to it then, Drop yelled again. And get there with as many men as you can, and bring those prisoners back immediately. They are extremely valuable to our cause, and we will need transport out of here. There's no need for us to stay. The commander, once aware of the situation, made all the arrangements needed, and a squad soon prepared to set off for the escape vessel with a small unit of soldiers. Oh, and by the way, Drop finally added, I should mention a few pirates who hijacked the ship are on board the escape pod. Now go! First Private Kvass and Sergeant Benta stood with the sergeant's entire unit at the airlock, awaiting the occupants of the foreign ship that had openly broadcast a highly classified, high-security landing signal. Benta didn't feel certain he should let anyone else know about the signal until he could verify for himself what was going on. He would have to play it off for the time being with whomever else may have seen the signature bearing the code. When the airlock opened before him and his men, only a handful of soldiers wearing unfamiliar armor stood in front of them. Who are you? Identify yourselves, Sergeant Benta demanded, his soldiers armed and at the ready. I will give you all the information you'll need once we're somewhere secure, said the man in front quickly, who seemed to be the commander of the small crew. And first, please trust us enough to dismiss all your non-officer subordinates. We need to keep our meeting more private than that. You expect me to take orders from some foreign soldiers who have just barged in here with a classified landing code? Benta shot back. Why don't you start by telling me how you came about that signal? For now, if you love your nation and your world, the stranger started, you must risk trusting us at least that much, or else more than just the Tansorian Federation will be in danger. Benta wasn't one to be intimidated easily, but he was shaken now by the man's urgent and troubled attitude. At least tell me who you are first, and how you came about that signal, he asked quietly. The man only looked at him sternly. Okay, fine, Benta finally said, then addressed his lower-ranking subordinates. Go on, you're dismissed, but stay close, and remain on alert for anything out of the ordinary. Anything else, that is. As the non-officers began leaving, Benta stopped Private Kvass. You stay, he said. Kvass eagerly but anxiously obeyed. As Sergeant Benta led the crew to an isolated location, he asked again. Now, could you at least tell us who you people are? I think we've earned that much. I agree. You have earned at least that, the leader of the foreign crew finally replied. I am called Jay, and I come on behalf of the Ravinian military, as well as your leader, the Prime Minister of Sor. Aezic and Bala stood shackled in what seemed to be a large hall, cut out within an even larger tree, surrounded by natives lightly clad in animal skins. Ahead of them was one they took to be the leader or chief, who seemed to be reprimanding in their native tongue the two who had brought the outsiders to the place. Aezic couldn't be sure, of course. They were both young women who looked like they could be sisters. The man was large and muscular, primal, but with an air of importance and regality about him. Then he spoke to Aezic in common. Where do you come from, outsiders? He asked in a booming voice. Aezic, not one to be intimidated, still also knew how to handle such a situation better than most, though he was startled that the leader could speak the language of space, when they were not to have had contact with any other worlds yet. But Aezic replied as honestly as he could. We apologize for disturbing you and your people, Aezic bowed, then began again. But, though it may be difficult to grasp at first, we come from another world, up there. He now pointed toward the sky. Before he started again, the leader stopped him. I know that you come from another planet, he said dryly. What I want to know is where you come from and who your people are. Now even more surprised, Aezic tried finding the right words. I see. We weren't aware you have made contact with other worlds already. My name is Aezic, and this is Bala. We come from a place known as Ravina. The leader of the natives stared at him suspiciously. Ravina. I have not heard of such a place. Is it part of the Order? I'm not sure what order you speak of, Aezic answered, confused. We are part of the Free World Alliance, one of the 3 major powers of our star system. I see, the leader said. Then he turned and spoke to a few of the other natives in their own language. Those men, who seemed to be guards, then advanced on Aezic and Vala. Aezic got ready to defend himself, but the chief spoke again to him in common. Do not worry, we will not harm you, but I cannot allow you to leave here. For now, please follow these men to a place you can stay and rest. We will bring you something to eat, and I will come to speak with you again shortly. I thank you for your hospitality and your understanding, Aezic said, still wary of the situation, but less so now that they didn't seem to be in immediate danger. If they wanted to get rid of them, they could have done so already, instead of giving them a place to stay and a meal. But there was one more problem. I asked, though, Aezic began, that you send some of your people back to rescue the rest of my crew from the wreckage of our ship. It seems it's not too far from here. We have already sent a party out to bring them back here, whether you are an enemy or not, the chief replied. We cannot have outsiders wandering around on our island. Not anymore. Aezic wondered what he meant by anymore. Thank you again, he said to the chief. Then he and Vala allowed the guards to escort them to their accommodations. With his still racking headache, the chief's hospitality was more than appreciated, as it would be the best rest he had gotten in a while. The rain had let up, and Lumina was slowly dispelling the darkness of the forest. Artis sat in the wreckage of the escape craft with Foderglaus, 5 other Kostians, and one of the Ascendancy soldiers, still cuffed to the hull of the pod. Artis had been nervously keeping watch, still wishing Azario hadn't left him in charge after his failure during the space skirmish. Foderglaus had noticed the young man's changed mood. What is it, my boy? He eventually asked. It's nothing, Poder, Artis mumbled. Just nervous, that's all. That's to be expected, lad, Glaus replied. This is all new not only for you, but for all of us Kostians. Even those of us who go out salvaging have never experienced a dogfight such as that in space, let alone something like being shot down and stranded on a remote planet. But you've already shown your spirit, and your ability to overcome those fears you have, for the good of others. I know that I have faith in you, Artis. But I didn't do anything, Artis admitted to the old man. I was scared the whole time, and I froze up. I only made it out alive out of sheer luck. My eyes weren't even open. I only acted at first because I felt like I was being called to do something, but once it began, I was too frightened to even move. He was ashamed of himself. What did I say earlier? Glaus asked the boy. I told you there is no such thing as luck, and certainly not in this case. You don't believe you were called by Omnis? You may have been afraid, but you answered when you were called upon. That itself takes great courage, and it isn't like we can do anything by our strength alone anyway. It takes the power of the one inside of us to move us to such action, and to accomplish what seems impossible. That is what I see inside of you, my boy. And in time, who knows what Omnis may have in store for you. Great things, I'm certain. Artis smiled, and his mind began to clear. But just then, they both heard something outside the pod, which then violently busted through the cracked hull. It's this way, look, be quiet, one of the Ascendancy soldiers loudly whispered to the other. The 2 grunts who were left behind by Drop and then fled the wreckage were now back at the pod, now being guarded, they noticed, only by Artis. The rain had stopped, and the soldiers knew their approach wouldn't be as silent as they'd hoped. Nevertheless, they advanced on the vessel, armed with pieces of synth metal rubble from the ship. They were able to spot Artis and Photoglaus sitting and talking within the pod, and they seemed distracted. "Alright, let's go," one of the soldiers said, and they both charged the pod, hoping to take it and the weapons, kill everyone inside except Glaus, and then find the rest of their crew. As the two Ascendancy soldiers burst through the crack in the hull, Artis was quickly on his feet, but he was startled and frightened. He had the plasma pistol in his hand, but he was immediately disarmed by one of the soldiers. His hand was injured, and the pistol slid across the floor, over to the other Ascendancy soldier, who was cuffed to the side of the pod, low enough to reach the weapon. None of the other Kostians could react to the surprise attack, but Artis, after being knocked to the ground and disarmed, somehow found the strength of will to draw the plasma blade that Zario gave him, which slashed the leg of one of the two soldiers, bringing him to the ground, crying out in pain. But the other one was too quick, and he managed to knock the blade away from the boy as well. Both Artis and the healthy Ascendancy soldier were in a stalemate, neither able to move for a weapon without the other doing the same, or one of the Kostians drawing their pistol. Before anyone else could arm themselves, however, the Ascendancy soldier chained to the hull picked up Artis's plasma pistol and took aim. "Yes, Grim, shoot him," the free soldier said to the bound one with the weapon in hand. "We can take the pod back from these weaklings." Artis was frozen in fear, staring down the barrel of the plasma pistol. His short life flashed before him. "No!" he thought he heard Glaus cry out. Then, the Ascendancy soldier fired.